So I didn't read a whole lot this month. I listened to two audiobooks. I read five mangas, and then I read seven books other than that. And yeah, that was pretty much my reading month. I was halfway in a reading slump because two of these books, which were Louis XIV, The Power and the Glory, and Doors of Eden, I actually started way back in September. They were both pretty long, 400 pages for Louis XIV, and just over 600 for Doors of Eden. So yeah, I was definitely happy to finish them. And they were both pretty good, and you get to my reviews in a second. But yes, I'm glad to be done with them and kind of out of this reading slump. Hopefully in December I will get to some more webtoons. I've got a couple completed series that I'm working through, as well as some ongoing series that I can at least finish a season of. So we'll see what December holds. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into November book. I finished Jeanette McCurdy's memoir slash autobiography, I'm Glad My Mom Died. This was definitely something I wasn't expecting. I mean, obviously, stardom isn't all it's cracked up to be, but I did not realize just how much problems and how much Jeanette hated stardom. And by the time I got about halfway through the book and she was offered the money to not speak about what happened at Nickelodeon and she said no, like, I was extremely happy for her that she said that, and I felt like that was the best decision she could have made for herself at that point. And she's very candid and honest throughout the book. And I did find it kind of interesting, how she takes a very long time to realize that what her mother did was not okay, that it was harmful, and yet her grandmother does some of the same things, and she's able to immediately see that. And she even says, as a young child, she didn't get along with her grandmother. She didn't care for her grandmother. And the one scene we get of her and her grandmother in her childhood, you can see the manipulation and the narcissism and the trying to make herself center of attention quite clearly through just a not even 2-minute interaction. And then as she gets older, you see more interactions, and this just reinforces what I think of her grandmother there. And then I do like that, along with this, you have her relationship with her grandfather, which had, from what she portrays, seems to have always been supportive, and he's always cared about her, and he does at one point, try to get her help, but her mother says, oh no, she doesn't need it, and then he just kind of backs off. And then I don't know what exactly to think of her father, because obviously he went through some of the same stuff that she did. He was there for the kind of emotional roller coaster that, one day her mom would be fine with him and the next she'd kick him out of the house, and start blaming him for things and, accusing him of having affairs and everything. And there seemed to be really no basis. But he also seemed to be rather detached. And yes, I said, I'm not sure exactly where I fall on him, but I know this had to take a lot for Jeanette McCurdy to write, and I definitely appreciate her candidness, her willing to just lay it all out, tell it like it is, and not hold back. And in all honesty, she really didn't pass any judgments. Not until the very, very end. And even then, she never really says that, this was bad, this was wrong. And, I mean, she obviously thinks that, and it obviously is. But she has come to peace with, this is what happened, and now I must move on. And I definitely wish her success and happiness in writing. And I can see where, the writing really does help her. You can just tell with some of the chapters that they were something that she felt like she needed to write, whether or not they were easy. And there was quite a few chapters in the audiobook that you could hear the emotion in her voice and her like trying not to cry. And yeah, I thought she did a great job with the narration as well, which of course, this being her story, of course she should be the one to narrate it, in my opinion. In my opinion, any memoir or autobiography should be narrated by the author, because this is their experiences, and I don't feel like anyone else can fully do it justice. Now, of course, they shouldn't be forced to if they don't want to, but I do believe they should definitely have that option. And obviously this was a very popular book. I was going to get it from the library, but there was like a 6-month wait. So I wound up getting it through Audible instead. And I did kind of want to listen to it, just because I feel like memoirs are something that I can absorb easily while I listen to them. So if you haven't read this, I would definitely say to check it out, but just be aware that obviously, there are some heavy subjects in there, death, abuse, eating disorders, and overall, even though it's a heavy book, I believe the overall message is positive. You see in here a lot of moments where Jeanette and her mom really did care for each other. And you see, like I said, her grandfather care for her, and you get to see her heal. And just overall, I feel like this has a very positive message. I finished my second audiobook of the month, and that is the autobiography of Catherine Janeway. I actually found out about this book because originally I had read the autobiography of James Kirk, and then I saw that they had Picard as well when I looked into that. And then looking on Goodreads, it showed that Janeway's had came out along with Spock's. And I saw that the audiobook was narrated by Kate Mulgrew, and so I was like, I absolutely have to get the audiobook. Yeah, I've been a fan of Voyager as long as I can remember, since it came out. I remember watching it as a little kid with my mom and dad, and yeah, I really liked it. And I like sci-fi in general, Star Trek in general, but Voyager's been my favorite. Even now that I've watched some of all of them, absolutely love Voyager, absolutely love Janeway. I did feel like parts of the book could have been expanded more. The childhood part going into the academy and the whole pre-Voyager years were done pretty well, but then I felt like the Voyager years were kind of rushed through, and it was almost like they're just giving a synopsis of the episodes and not really diving deeper into the emotions that would have been in play. I do like, however, that Tuvix is something that Janeway cannot forget and that she still questions. And I do really like that because I feel like that was something that, what is the right decision? You don't really know. There's no really good answer, no right or wrong. Then along with that, you have the Doctor and his ethical conundrum, and that's kind of glossed over. And I just feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities to add depth to what was in the actual show, and they could have maybe scaled back a little bit on the childhood. I mean, it wouldn't have to be much, but, either scale back on the childhood or maybe choose less to focus on from what was, the time period of the show, so that you can kind of go more into depth in that part. But I did still enjoy it, because again, I like Star Trek. Janeway's my favorite, so I was just a little disappointed in it. And I would really like to see them do an autobiography of Seven of Nine, but it looks like they're only doing captains, at least for now. But, hopefully that's something to look forward to. So the third book I read this month, and this actually has taken me a while. It's November 18th. I've only read 3 books in November so far. And this one I actually started way back in September. But this book was Louis XIV, The Power and the Glory. I've always been interested in French history, more so Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. But obviously, Louis XIV is related to that. So I saw this and picked it up. And, it's for as long as he reigned, which was 70 plus years. It was only a 400-page book, so it didn't go a whole lot into depth. Although it did cover, for the most part, it covered a lot, although briefly. And it did seem to concentrate more on his romances, who he married, who he took as his mistress, and so on. And then it did, of course, deal with the building of Versailles a little bit, and it did go into his military conquests, and they had some decent detail to them. But one thing I did find confusing is that one of his grandsons, I believe, was Felipe de Orleans. Sometimes he's referred to as Felipe. Sometimes he's referred to as Duke de Orleans. The same thing that his wife, Marie Therese, she is sometimes referred to as that, sometimes as the Queen, which that one wasn't too bad, except when there are paragraphs when they talk about both her and his mother, and they refer to them both as the Queens. So I do believe one thing that would have helped if there was like a bibliography in the back that would say, like Felipe d'Orleans, also known as Duke d'Orleans, grandson of Louis XIV. I feel like that would have helped a little bit, having that, and a family tree would definitely have helped. Again, like I said, this was a good, really introduction. I'd say it's something if you want to learn a little bit. I did learn a bit, and it was written well. It was just, like I said, confusing at parts, and with a lot of people sharing names. Like there was, Felipe the Duke d'Orleans, of course Louis XIV's brother Felipe, his nephew, I believe, was Felipe V of Spain. And that, of course, can't be helped. They are all named that. But again, that's why I think a kind of like guide bibliography would have made it a lot easier. So I finished The Empress of Time, which is the sequel to The Keeper of Night, which I read, I believe, about 2 months ago. And this is, of course, still about Ren, and it follows her after the ending of the last book, and it jumps forward in time 10 years. And then this is kind of the atmosphere. I just want to read like the first paragraphs. So it starts in the early 1900s in Tokyo, Japan. In the last nights of the 19th century, the humans began to whisper about a new demon, hungrier and crueler than all the rest. The yokai hunted where shadows grew deep, in the thin breath of twilight that bridges night and day. It crawled from the spindly shadows of chair legs on hardwood floors, the crooked shade that lamps cast on wallpaper, even your own silhouette, the one shadow you could never escape. But none of those things were really shadows at all. They were holes carved into the human world, peering into a void that echoed down and down through an endless night. Its darkness could peel away your skin like you were a soft summer peach, crawl deep in your bone marrow, and rot you from the inside out, soak the soil with your blood. The night stole the parts of you that no one wanted, all your lies and broken promises and disappointments. From these holes, the yokai clawed its way up and up into the stark light of a new world. Then all of the terrors that night's veil normally concealed, the things you were never meant to see, were laid bare. The yokai's jaw swung open like an unlatched gate, and it began to feast. The police always arrived too late, long after the echoes of screams had faded away, and the blood had run dry, leaving dark stains across the floor. They'd find no clues at all, no broken doors or windows, no fingerprints or stray hairs, as if the monster had never even existed. The only pattern between the deaths was the state of the bodies. Rib cages opened up like books, organs spilled across the floor, and hearts mysteriously absent. So the humans prayed to gods who couldn't intervene even if they'd wanted to, made shrines to benevolent yokai, and lit 1,000 lights to banish the shadows. But none of it made any difference because it wasn't a yokai at all. It was me. So yeah, that's basically the kind of aesthetic that you have here. And of course, as I said in the first book, Ren is a very morally gray character. And this book kind of expands on that. And it also shows that even though she's not all good, she still has her moments. Like, she really cares about Nevin, her brother, and she's willing to do anything. And I've got a couple other quotes here to share. And a yokai asks her to bless him. And she says, "As the keeper of night and the end of all things, I give you my word that the shadows will walk beside you and that you will never be alone in darkness." I just thought that was like a really cool quote, and it really fits. And then we have another description of another character. In the approaching dusk, with the backdrop of a sky slowly turning red, he looked like a fallen angel who had crawled his way up from hell. I'm not going to say who that's about, even though he does come in relatively early in the book. But, yeah, I will let you discover that for yourself. And I really liked this book. It was a little longer than The Keeper of Night, and I feel like it fleshed out the characters a good bit more, and I feel like the plot moved faster as well. It was less about the exploration and finding yourself as it was, resolving this conflict that is the central part of the story. So definitely, if you liked the first one, check it out. If you like kind of darker stories with morally gray characters, check it out. And I hope you all enjoy your reading. So I finished The Doors of Eden by Adrian Tiskowski. This took me a while, mostly because I started it and then kind of just left it after I'd read about 20 pages. Now, I really like Adrian Tiskowski. He is the author of As Wild Children of Time, which I've spoken about before. That's the one with the spider people. And yeah, I just found that really interesting. And now this, The Doors of Eden, basically in each geological period of time, different sentience has arisen. So, like, for example, you have the Cambrian, and in that timeline, the trilobites became sentient. In the Ordovician, it was a squid-type thing. Then you have a salamander-type thing, cat-type thing. So yeah, it's rather interesting. And the couple books I've read by him, he tends to focus on different ways that intelligence can arise in non-human creatures and how humans would react with them. So I really did enjoy this. I felt like at times it was a little long, but he has some really good quotes. So you had 3 billion years passed like motes in a god's eye. Life expanded to fit the meager niches the world provided. And then, this thing, the Birdman, displayed none of those tricks. Its body was built from a different alphabet, another language entirely. You have What If, bear with me, a civilization of gigantic, immortal, spacefaring trilobites didn't evolve. I know, it seems hardly credible, but imagine, if you will. How many times can you watch the world end after all, even if it's not your world? Lee Pryor did not scream at monsters. Monsters were her business. She laughed in the faces of cryptids and ideally took a few blurry pictures for others to dismiss. This entire universe of parallels was complex, held together by inviolable laws and irresistible forces, composed of an unimaginable amount of energy. Yet, at the same time, these were just tiny particles that existed on reality's knife edge. It was all numbers when you came down to it. And I've got two more here. The waveforms always collapsed to zero. They were all living is what was simply a possibility. All of reality, which had seemed so robust and enduring, was merely the fevered dream of a dying god. We are the things it dreamt, and now it needs us to keep the dream alive. So yeah, as you can tell, like, the writing is very deep at times, very lyrical, and so yeah, I definitely enjoyed this. And if you like more of a hardcore sci-fi, definitely check him out. And I would say if you like more of the adventure type sci-fi even, yeah, he does really good with the adventure stuff. But yeah, he's a very interesting writer. So I finished reading Debating Darcy. This is a modern day YA retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and it is written by Sayantani Dasgupta, and it features our main character, Leela, and she is a Bengali American. Her parents immigrated to America when she was very young, or before she was very young, and had her in America. And then you have Feroz Darcy, whose mother is Pakistani and his father is British, I believe they said, and they live on Pemberley College campus, and he is a senior in high school. She is a junior. They are both in debate and speech. She does humorous interpretation, and he does Lincoln Douglas debate. And so when they first meet, they are at a competition. It's lunchtime. She is singing on a cafeteria table to just kind of relieve some stress. And Feroz ends up making the comment that she's not beautiful enough to tempt him. And this kind of sparks off a rivalry. And the rivalry goes on throughout the whole book. You know, obviously as in the original Pride and Prejudice. So yeah, I did really like how, you know, it was a very diverse book, and yet it didn't just feel like the author was like, yeah, okay, I've got to have a gay character. Okay, check that box off. I have to have, you know, an African American character. Let's check that box. You know, check this box, check that box. It was all, you know, just very simply and organically done. You know, these characters are simply black, or simply Hispanic, simply Desi, you know, and it's mentioned, and that's really it. Like, you know, and the little bits of culture that are in there, it's just a part of life. It's not forced, if that makes sense. And then, of course, there is some to do with the Me Too movement and sexual harassment, the different ways women and men are treated, because, of course, you know, you have the speech competition, and they get little comments about what they could do differently do better what they did well. And at one point, Leela is wearing a white shirt and a pink bra underneath. It's not that noticeable, but it's noticeable enough. And the comment is made by a coach that it was extremely unprofessional. And even her debate partner, the one she's going against, he is very rude about it, and there are some other things that are going on, and this eventually inspires Leela to move on from the Lincoln Douglas debate as well, where they basically give her a topic and then say you need to come up with for and against arguments, and she argues both. She goes to original oratory, which is basically you make your own speech and perform it. And what she was originally in was a humorous interpretation, whereas you take a passage from a book and reinterpret it humorously. And so her first original oratory speech, she does a lecture about Little Red Riding Hood and how it relates to the type of discrimination she has seen and has seen her teammates be a part of. And she says, "What if we women aren't Red Riding Hood? Red Riding Hood. What if we never were? What if instead we were always the wolf?" And so, like I said, I thought this was very well done. It has those serious moments in it, and then it also has the humor in it, of course. And it is the comedy of manners, and you do have a diction coach who helps them learn, how to better speak and such. And there is a scene where her and Leela get into an argument because Leela is rumored to be dating Feroz Darcy, who this professor is, 100% sure he will marry her daughter. And so they kind of get into it, and the professor comes off as rather ridiculous, and this is quite humorous. But yeah, so if you do enjoy YA, I would definitely say you could do this. It's a very well-written YA, and it's not super heavy on any one topic. It's very broad in the topics discussed. Like I said, you have friendship, romance, college, admissions and tests. So, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was fun, and I read it very quickly. I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is the first book that she had translated from Japanese to English. It's rather short. It is 163 pages, I believe. Yes, 163 pages. And it follows Keiko Furikura. She is 36, still working at a convenience store, and she's only considered part-time, and so she has to deal with a lot of people are like, well, why aren't you married? Why don't you have kids? And on top of this, she is also not neurotypical. I'm not sure, if it's like a Asperger's-like syndrome, but she basically copies the mannerisms of people in order to get by, and that's part of the reason she likes a convenience store, is that, there's this manual, and it's basically, this is how you greet the customers, this is what you say, and then every day there's something on special. This is what's on special. This is how much we want to sell. Yeah, and it's just very structured. And then eventually she winds up, one second. She winds up with Shiraha, who was also a worker there for a little bit of time. And I really didn't like him. I don't think you're meant to like him. He basically wants to take advantage of her. And he's like, okay, well, I'll live with you. You work. I'll stay here. I'm not going to leave the house. And he just like continuously puts her down and everything. But I feel like this does but does not bother her. Yeah, at first she's like, well, okay, you're useful to me because now everybody sees me as normal. And then eventually she realizes, you know what, this ain't right. And I was very happy when that part happened. So yeah, like I said, this is a very short book. And it is her first book to be translated. So if you're interested in, maybe getting into some more international fiction or in picking up any Sayaka Murata books, I would say Convenience Store Woman would probably be a good one to start with, at least for her, just because it is her first. And, I do feel like it's a pretty easy book to get into as well. So it is a good kind of like beginner book, I would say. Earthlings was the second Sayaka Murata book I read. This one follows Natsuki and her cousin Yu, along with their little stuffed animal, who's a stuffed hedgehog named Piyut, and he is from the planet Popopopia, I believe is how they pronounce it. And it turns out that this is also where Yu and Natsuki are from. And obviously, as you read the book, you find out, well, very quickly that this honestly isn't true. It's just a coping mechanism that both of these children use to deal with what adults have done to them. And it gets pretty dark. And really throughout the whole book, it's pretty dark. But at its core, it is just like Convenience Store Woman, a story of those who don't fit in to the traditional mold of, get married and have kids. For whatever reason, this just isn't what they want. And so it is kind of interesting to see how these characters break out of that. And honestly, I thought Convenience Store Woman was a lot less disturbing. Earthlings was really disturbing at points. But I also feel like, parts of it, especially what happened to Natsuki, the aftermath of that, and then how her sister reacts and how she, shows how her friends react. I just feel like all of that does kind of open up a dialogue. And yeah, so I will definitely say it was a hard book to get through, but I do think it's worth it to read it if you can deal with that sort of stuff. So the only manga I read this month was Monthly Girls Nozaki-kun, and I read the first 5 volumes of it. And this is a 4-panel manga that follows the titular Nozaki-kun, as well as his classmate, Chiyo Sakura. And you find out very quickly, Nozaki draws manga, and then Chiyo gets roped into helping him, basically. and it's fun. I do feel like it uses a lot of your standard Soho tropes, but none of them are overly done. Like, I feel like it's all still very fun, very tasteful, but it's also kind of a more of the same story if you've read a lot of Soho manga like I have. And it's just kind of your normal everyday slice of life. But what I really do like is that in this series, the side characters get fleshed out pretty well. And, they have their relationships. And it's not just a harem, a reverse harem. And kind of like everybody shares the limelight. And so you can connect to all the characters, and it really, truly feels like a fleshed out world almost. Corner of the world, I should say, because obviously this is just one school and it concentrates on just one group of friends. But I do enjoy it, and I will continue it at least up till volume 10, which is as much as my coworker had and lent me. So, yeah. And that was everything I read in November.